Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the 10 hardest champions to master for season 10. So these are going to be, in my opinion, the champions that it's going to take you the most amount of time to be able to play them to their fullest potential. So if we start off here up in the top lane for my first pick, it's going to be Riven. So what I'm looking for in a mastered Riven player, a bunch of different things here, but the main ones, animation canceling. I think that's very important. There's a lot of different animation cancels you can perform with Riven, so that does take you a little bit of time to get used to. I think another big one is controlled aggression. You're gonna see a lot of average Riven players just not know how to play with a lead. They'll play way too aggressive when they get a lead. They'll end up just throwing that lead and it won't even matter what they do in the early game. So I think that's a really big one there. Wall jumps around the map, being able to get used to those is pretty important. Correct combo usage is a big one too. You do have a lot of different combos that you can use for different scenarios, so just understanding which combo is going to be best for each and every situation is something that will take you a little bit of time to get used to. My second top lane pick here was a little bit more difficult to choose. I decided to go with Gangplank, but I was debating between Gangplank, Aurelia, or Jace. I went with Gangplank because his barrels are a very unique ability, and it's something that does take you a little bit of time to get used to. It's a mechanic that no other champion in the game has, so it's going to take you a while to get just used to using the barrels, and then also getting used to the different combos you can use with them. So triple barrel combos, phantom barrel combos, and just barrel consistency in the mid to late game is going to take you a lot longer, in my opinion, to really master than Aurelia mechanics or than Jace mechanics. And I think a really underrated one that differentiates a good Gangplank from a mastered Gangplank player is just their ultimate positioning. You'll see a lot of new Gangplank players just always be a little bit off on their ultimate positioning. It will just allow the enemy to just barely escape, or they'll just put it in an area to where you're not completely blocking off a choke point. So I think that just your consistency with being able to position your ultimate correctly depending on the situation is really important, in my opinion. So moving on to my first jungle pick now, this one shouldn't be much of a surprise. It's going to be Lee Sin. So keys to mastering Lee Sin, there's a bunch of different things you need to learn. So there's insect variations, you got your flash kick play, you got your flash ward hop plays. So those take you a lot of time to get used to, and it's a mechanic that really no other champion in the game has. So it's going to take you a while to learn those types of mechanics. Avoiding Lee syndrome, and what I mean by this, if you don't know what this means, is basically just not going in on every single Q. You'll see a lot of new Lee Sin players just take Qs no matter what. If their Q connects, they're gonna take the second part of their Q and they're just gonna end up going in and end up dying. So I think being able to analyze the situation, knowing when it's good to take that second Q and when it's good to dive the back line, is something that does take a lot of time to get used to with Lee Sin. You've got your ward hop plays as well, and that's a mechanic that not a lot of other champions have in their kit, so it's something that's going to be new to a lot of players picking up Lee Sin, and it's something that is going to take you a while to learn. Q hit consistency is also really important. You're going to see a lot of new Lee Sin players just always miss their Q, or miss their Q a lot of the time throughout the game, and I just think that being able to hit that consistently, being able to just know when the right time is to throw out that Q, just not randomly throwing it out, waiting for your team to CC the enemy champion, or waiting for them to be in an area to where your Q is guaranteed to hit. That's something that you do have to learn on Lee Sin as well. And then for my second jungle pick, it's going to be Elise. Now I think that arguably, if Elise is played to her fullest potential, if you've mastered Elise, I do think right now she is one of the strongest junglers in the game. A lot of things differentiate your average Elise from your really good Elise player. I think one of the big ones is early game tower dives. You're rarely going to see new Elise or just average Elise players abuse her tower diving potential in the early game, but once you get up into the higher elos, once you start seeing really good Elise players, you're going to notice them level 3 tower diving top lane if their top laner has pressure, even tower diving mid lane or bot lane as it gets a little bit later on. So knowing when you should go for those tower dives and being able to execute them correctly in the early game is a key to mastering Elise. Your correct human versus spider form usage is really vital to mastering Elise, just knowing which form you should be in for every situation in the game. Cocoon consistency, kind of similar to Lee Sin Q hit consistency, I think is really important to master Elise. If you're just able to hit your cocoon a lot of the time, then you're going to be able to get a ton of picks with that. It's going to lead to objectives, it's going to lead to towers, and you're just going to be able to win a lot of games just by getting good picks with your cocoon. And then team fight effectiveness, I think this is one that really differentiates like a good Elise from a mastered Elise player. A lot of average Elise players just will not be very impactful at all in team fights. They won't be able to like find that pick before a team fight starts or as a team fight is happening with their cocoon and burst somebody out. But I think a really good Elise player, even though Elise isn't a great team fight champion, will still be able to make her work in those team fights. And then for my first mid lane pick here, it's going to be Azir. Now, kind of the opposite to Elise. I think that even when Azir is mastered right now, I don't think he's a great mid lane champion. Like, I think that Azir probably isn't worth spending time on right now because he's just not in a great state. But I do still think in order to play Azir to his fullest potential, it does take you a lot of games, and he is still a very difficult champion to master. A bunch of keys here to mastering Azir: correct soldier positioning and just getting used to the soldier mechanic is something that will take you a little bit of time. It's a very unique mechanic. I don't think any other champion in the game has a similar mechanic like that to Azir, so it's not something you're just going to be able to pick up right away and start having success with. Different combos are going to take you a bit of time to learn as well. Being able to know when the right situation is to go for that Shurima shuffle and being able to pull it off consistently is not something you're going to be able to do as soon as you pick up Azir. Your drifting combos as well is going to take you time to learn, and I just think your team fight micromanagement, being able to position your soldiers well in team fights, being able to micromanage those soldiers well in fights and get out as much DPS as possible is something that is key to mastering the champion. Yasuo is going to be my second mid laner on the list here, and this one might be a bit more controversial, but I just think that Yasuo, he does have a lot of different combos he can use depending on the situation. You got your Keyblade, your Beyblade, your Airblade. I think similar to Riven, controlling your aggression is a really big one that differentiates your Yasuo players. So just being able to know how to play with a lead in the early game, not throwing your lead, and just playing with that controlled aggression is going to take you a bit of time to learn on the champion. Consistently being able to hit your tornadoes with Yasuo is also really key. Your E minion surfing is something that's a really unique mechanic, and it's something that will take you a little bit of time to get used to. There's a bunch of other things as well. I think that your wind wall usage in team fights, being able to use that at the correct time and being able to use it to just block a maximum amount of damage, or just being able to block a high value ability in a team fight, is something that will take you a bit of time to get used to on the pick. And then I think choosing your engages correctly in mid to late game fights is really key to mastering the champion. You'll notice a lot of average Yasuo players just take every nado or take every knock up, even if it's not the correct situation to look to go in. So I think that if you've truly mastered Yasuo, then you really know how to play your mid to late game fights, and you know when is the correct situation to look to dive the back line and go for that 3-man ultimate. And then taking a look at two bot lane picks now, my first one here is going to be Aphelios. So the newest AD carry in the game, a very unique champion. We haven't seen a champion that only has technically one ability in their kit, so that's something in itself is going to take you a bit of time to get used to. Being able to judge when is the correct situation to swap to certain weapons, just your weapon management is going to take you time to get used to, and I think that weapon combo utilization, just having the correct weapons for each and every situation is something that is going to be key to mastering the champion. Being able to space correctly based on the weapon that you have is something that not a lot of other AD carries have to deal with. I guess you got Jinx there with her Q. Those have two different ranges on them. You got Kog'Maw with his W enhancing his range, but very few other AD carries have different ranges with their auto attack. So because Aphelios does, it's going to take you time to get used to how you should be spacing in team fights based on which weapon you do have. And then for my second AD carry pick, it's going to be Ezreal, and I think this is one AD carry where you can really notice right away pretty much whether or not that Ezreal player is just average or whether or not he's mastered. Once you get up to higher elos and once you really see what a mastered Ezreal player looks like, it makes the Ezreal players in your elo and in the lower elos just look completely terrible. So what I'm looking for in a mastered Ezreal player, Q hit consistency is a big one there. You'll see a lot of average Ezreal players just always missing Qs in team fights, and if you cannot hit this ability at a consistent rate, there's really no point in playing the champion because he's basically just a sitting duck out there for the most part. Eing forward at the correct times is something that will take you a lot of time to get used to. You'll see a lot of low elo and a lot of average Ezreal players just using this ability against them a lot of the time. You'd think that having a gap closer in your kit should mean that you're going to be safer than most other AD carries, but most of the time you'll see Ezreal players just eing forward and it will just end up getting them killed more often than it will actually end up saving them. Auto weaving in teamfights is really something I think is underappreciated in a good Ezreal player. A lot of new Ezreal players will almost always just sit back and use their Q only in fights, but knowing when that correct situation is to move forward and look to weave in those autos in between Qs is something that is really key to mastering the champion. And I think quick tier stacking is also another one that's really underrated in a good Ezreal player. You'll notice that a lot of average Ezreal players will sometimes like forget to use their abilities when walking back to lane, or they just won't be stacking their tier as efficient as possible, and you'll notice that mastered Ezreal players will be hitting their tier spike as quick as possible every single game. And then for a couple support picks to round it out, my first one is going to be Thresh. Some keys to mastering him: knowing when you should be playing up in a fight versus when you should be sitting back is really key. I think you're gonna notice like a lot of really good Thresh players are always positioning correctly in fights, and you have the ability to move forward, look for that pick with your hook, but you also have the ability to sit further back, use that lantern to save your AD carry or save your teammate if they are looking to play aggressive. So just knowing how you should be playing the champion throughout the game and where you should be positioning with him is really key to mastering him. Being able to hit your hook at a consistent rate is really key to mastering the pick as well. If you're not able to hit that ability at a high rate on the champion, then there's really no point in playing him. Hook predictions, just predictions with your hook and your flay, are something that you're really going to notice, and this is something that when you look at a mastered Thresh player, these are some of the things that you're going to notice right away. So being able to predict like gap closing abilities with your hook, being able to predict flashes with your hook, and then just flaying movement abilities. So for example, being able to flay something like a Tristana jump, a Rengar jump, keeping a champion like Elise off your AD carry by flaying them when they try to jump in on the back line. Those are some things that you're really going to notice in a mastered Thresh player. And then for my final support to round out the video here, it is going to be Bard. So I think one of the big things when it comes to mastering Bard is just correct ultimate usage throughout the game, but especially in team fights. It's so difficult, even if you played a ton of games on Bard, to really be able to know how you should be using your ultimate in team fights, whether you should be using that on your teammates, whether you should be using that on the enemy team. Should you be looking for a single man ultimate? Should you be looking for a multi-man ultimate? How you use your ultimate in team fights is going to change with every single game, and it's just really difficult, even if you have a ton of games on Bard, to be using this ultimate to its fullest potential in every situation. You'll notice almost immediately whether or not the Bard player actually knows how to play the champion based on if they're using their ultimate to help the enemy team more so than they're using the ultimate to help your team. You'll notice a lot of new Bard players just using their ultimate on their teammate when they shouldn't be, or using their ultimate on the enemy team when they shouldn't be, and it just feels like a lot of the time this ability is counterproductive than it is productive. And then a couple other things here: your Q flash combo, being able to reposition your Q with your flash to enable yourself to get that stun up against the wall, when you should roam versus when you should lane. So a really good Bard player is going to choose correct timings to look for that roam, and he's really going to be able to capitalize on strong roam plays in the early game there, whereas like an average Bard player will either mess up roam plays or they'll just stay in lane the whole game and they'll never even attempt to try and roam. Queuing off of minions in the laning phase to get that stun is something that you really have to be just focusing on a ton in the laning phase. You really got to be paying attention to like when the enemy AD carry or when the enemy support goes behind that minion, and if you can stun off of that, it can just lead to a ton of picks, ton of damage, and a lot of kills in the laning phase. Alright, so that is going to be all for the video, guys. Those are my 10 hardest champions to master for Season 10. Now, I do not expect you to agree with this list at all, so if you do not agree with a certain champion on the list, then be sure to let me know down in the comments below who you would take out. Let me know who you would add in. But with that being said, guys, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I'll see you in my next video.